So my name is Kayla Kleinman. I'm a fourth year doctoral student at University of Hartford, and I'm also a clinical psychology extern at CAPS. Next year, I'll be completing my pre-doc internship at Rochester Regional Health Hospitals through Rochester Institute of Technology. And for undergrad, I went to Skidmore College and I earned a degree in neuroscience. And then between undergrad and grad school, I did some research on biological markers of children's mental illness. So if you were listening really carefully to that intro, you might have picked up on the fact that I'm really passionate about the brain and about cognition and thinking. So professionally, procrastination is a topic that falls within the areas of psychology that I'm especially interested in. And then there's also another reason I'm qualified to give this talk, and it's that in my own personal life, I'm quite familiar with procrastination, and I even procrastinated making this presentation. I'll tell you more about that later. So here's an ideal way to get work done. I think this is maybe what professors think that we're doing when we're assigned a project 2 weeks out from the due date. So on the y-axis, we have work completed, and on the x-axis, we have time and days. So the paper's assigned. We work on it a little bit on the first few days, maybe take a few days and don't work on it. And then as time passes, we work a little more and ramp up our efforts. And then the night before it's due, we do more than we've been doing. And then we turn in the paper and we've completed all the work. That sounds great. Here's what we often end up doing. We spend 13 days accomplishing almost nothing on the project, but we kind of stress about it in the background, and maybe we stare at it sometimes. And then the day before it's due, we do all the work for it and possibly stay up all night, and then we turn it in. So this isn't the best way to get work done. Might be one of the reasons you've joined me for this seminar. This is stressful, and it's not just stressful the day that you stay up and do all the work, it's even stressful on the days leading up to the day it's due, because you're kind of dreading it and carrying it around in your mind and worrying about it, and you're having thoughts about how you should be doing it all the time. That's how it is for me. The other reason it's not ideal is that the quality of work we end up producing really isn't quite as high as it would be if we had taken the time to do it kind of more over time. So let's talk more about why we do our work this way, even though it's not really the best strategy. So there's a lot of enticing things we do when we're procrastinating. We might play Animal Crossing, we might watch Tiger King, we might browse Instagram, we might clean our houses. So are these things the reason why we procrastinate? They're not. They're what we do, but they're not why we do it. And do we procrastinate because we're lazy? We don't. We actually have a whole dopamine system designed in our brains to help us get things done. And we really like getting things done, and we get really good feelings when we accomplish things. If you think back to the last thing you did accomplish, like a project or a paper or completing an essay, that feels really good. And if you've ever read the entire Wikipedia page on Watergate, or cleaned your entire house instead of working on something that was due, you know that procrastination isn't about being lazy, because you wouldn't do those things if you were lazy. And weirdly enough, telling ourselves that we're lazy is a way to help us get motivated, but it can be harmful, and I'm going to talk more about that later. So procrastination is not a character deficit. One reason we procrastinate is that procrastination can be a way to increase our motivation. So as the deadline approaches, we get more adrenaline and we feel more motivated and we start getting things done. And this works in the sense that we usually get our work done, but again, it's stressful and we don't necessarily produce the quality of work we would otherwise. So it's clearly not the best strategy a lot of the time. So think of procrastination as an inner alarm system. It's telling us that something's wrong. The same way that pain is our body's alarm system when there's something wrong in the body. Think of procrastination as an alarm system that tells us there's something wrong in this situation surrounding this task that's like not allowing us to get it done. So the alarm's going off. What does the alarm mean? It means that your brain doesn't have the stimulation, motivation, or information and/or to get what you're trying to get done. So let's talk more specifically about the things that could be wrong when this procrastination alarm is going off. So you're procrastinating, you have this inner alarm going off about the task. What could be wrong? There's really only two things that can go wrong. The first is that you don't know what to do. Although you know what to do, write an essay, for example, you don't know exactly what the next step is you need to take towards your task. The second thing that can be wrong is you don't feel like doing it. Often the first option here can feel like the second option. So I'd recommend always working on the first option, even if you don't think it's applicable in this case. So let's talk about the first thing first, not knowing what to do. So as I mentioned before, I procrastinated making this presentation. I have a fair amount of experience teaching and presenting, but I don't have as much experience doing an outreach presentation like this one. It's different than what I'm used to. So I felt like I didn't want to work on it, and I noticed that I was doing anything but working on it. In reality, I just didn't know what was involved in making this kind of presentation. I knew vaguely that I needed to make a PowerPoint, I needed to prepare some things to say, I needed to make some sort of handout, but those were vague ideas, and it turns out that wasn't enough information for my brain, thus procrastination. So although you may think you know what you need to do, like you need to write an essay, in reality, you may not actually know what you need to do. So if you're struggling to complete a task, you need to write the steps out. So don't just outline them in your head, write them out. And writing them out is essential to ensure you really do know all the steps. How are you going to keep track of like 15 or 20 steps in your head? I can tell you, based on what I know about working memory, that you can't keep all those steps in your head, so you need to write them out. So if you've ever seen the episode of SpongeBob where he's assigned an essay and he does everything except write the essay for the duration of the episode, that is very relatable to me. And if you haven't seen it, it's recommended viewing after you see this webinar. In undergrad at Skidmore, where I went, I came into school as a government major, but then my best friend at the time was taking biology, and she convinced me to take Intro to Bio with her in addition to my other classes. And I ended up as a neuroscience major. So, but just like at Wesleyan, Skidmore was a liberal arts school. So I took classes in history, English, chemistry, bio, government history. I've said that already. So I learned how to procrastinate in many subjects. And I'm sort of just kidding. I eventually learned how to break down tasks and very different kinds of assignments for each subject. So this is my 4th year in grad school. So I've been practicing not procrastinating for quite a long time, but every time I get a new kind of task to do, like this presentation, I sometimes have to revisit breaking things down again so I can stop avoiding them. So we're gonna do some practice breaking down different kinds of tasks you might have. So first, I'd like you to take a few seconds to think about something that you are procrastinating on right now. Okay, I'm sure that wasn't that hard to think of. So the first example I'm gonna outline is comparing two perspectives of a historical event. And this is my process for writing this kind of essay, and it might not be yours. The important part is to identify all the steps and break it down to as many steps as possible. And that's to really give your brain as much information as possible about how to do the task. So here are my steps. So first, I would read each perspective and take notes in the margins about the key point on the paper. Then I'd compile all those notes into bullet points on a Word document and separate it by each perspective. Then I'd make a third section in this Word document, and I'd write about the differences between those two parts that I wrote about. Then I'd look over all of that and determine a thesis or a key argument and pick out all the points that I want to include in my essay. Then I would look at those arguments and put them in an order that I thought made sense. Then I'd go back to the readings and find a good quote for each point. Then using the arguments and the points and the quote, I would write body paragraphs. Then based on those body paragraphs, I'd write an introduction introducing it, and then I'd write a conclusion. So notice how granular this is. Like these are baby steps. And that's really, really important to help combat procrastination. Your brain really needs to know what's involved in doing this task. Then I would edit and proofread what I wrote. So that is one way to break down one kind of task you might have, writing an essay. I'm also going to share an example of breaking down how I might study for a bio final. And again, this is my process for studying for exams. It might not be yours. Again, the important part is to break it down into steps, as many small steps as you can, to really give your brain as much information as possible about how to complete the task. So here are my steps. The first step is I'd identify which chapters in the textbook are on the exam. Then I would read all the chapters that are part of this exam. And then as I'm reading, I'd create a question for each fact I see or important piece of information. And that might be a multiple choice question or an essay, depending on what kind of information it is. And then I'd start typing those in a document while I'm reading. And if that's a lot of work and there's a lot of chapters, I might be like, okay, on Monday, I'll do chapter 5. On Tuesday, I'll do chapter 6, break it down. Then I'll have this giant fake exam and I'll print it out and I'll take it. Then I'll grade it and then I'll identify all the questions I got wrong and look them over. Then I will pull all the questions that I got wrong into their own new exam and retake that exam. Then I'll grade it again and identify all the questions I got wrong again, look them over, and then compile them into a smaller exam and take that exam. And then at that point, if I haven't learned pieces of the information, I'll make flashcards to review them. So I'll practice with those flashcards. Again, this might not be how you study for an exam. However you do, it's important to break it down into steps. If you are interested in this way of studying, I have a book at the end of this presentation that kind of outlines more information about how to do this kind of study. So we've talked about the first thing that goes wrong when your procrastination alarm goes off. It's that you don't know what to do. So we talked about breaking your task into tiny steps to give yourself as much information as you can about the task. But let's say you're still not working on it even after that. We can talk about the second thing that could be wrong when your procrastination alarm's going off. Maybe you just don't feel like doing it. So why don't you feel like doing it? Here are some common reasons. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're bored. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you're anxious. Maybe you're afraid of failing at the thing you're not doing. Maybe you're afraid of succeeding in the thing you're not doing. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed. Maybe you want the thing to be perfect. Or maybe you just don't care about the thing that you're doing. So calling ourselves lazy is sometimes a way to avoid identifying what's really going on and what's stopping us from doing something. So I'll tell you about something that I've been working on personally. I'm currently working on the statistical analyses for my doctoral dissertation. And by working on it, I mean I've also been avoiding it a lot. And I started wondering, maybe I'm lazy, and trying to motivate myself that way, which I'll talk more about later. But I was taking my own advice from this presentation and doing some journaling and kind of sitting in what I was feeling and trying to identify why I was avoiding the task. And it turns out that I've been feeling a lot of anxiety about not feeling qualified to do my complicated stats analyses. I did some writing and wrote down all the reasons I am qualified, and that, you know, my committee is going to be looking at what I do and making sure it's correct, that I've done similar work in the past and it's gone well, that I've taken classes in how to do this, and even that a whole point of a dissertation and being a student is to learn how to do these things and that I don't need to be perfect at them before I've learned them. So I did some journaling on that, and that's really helped me remove that block that I had, and I've been able to work on it ever since. So it turns out there was definitely some anxiety, fear of failure at the root of my procrastination, even though it just felt like I didn't want to do it. So I'm going to point out some ways to correct the issue of not feeling like you want to do it. So if you're hungry, you can eat. If you're tired, you can take a nap. If you're not really sure what's going on, but you're feeling some type of way about what you're doing, you can definitely journal and try to figure that out. You can climb the wall, which is what I'm going to talk about next. You can use a website blocker if you're feeling kind of bored and getting easily distracted. You can set a timer to tell yourself, okay, I'm going to work on this for 20 minutes, and then if I want to stop, I can. You can use something called the Pomodoro technique. I'm going to link a website at the end for a timer for this, but it involves doing like a period of work, a short break, a period of work, a short break, a period of work, and then a long break, and kind of repeating that. You can set your devices to do not disturb to help decrease distractions. And you can try to create a solid workspace. It can be really hard depending on where you're doing work from now, especially the way things have been disrupted. But this might include trying to let people know in your environment that you're working, doing your work somewhere weird and private, like the bathroom, whatever you can figure out to work to try to make your space more conducive. And defining done is really important. So if you have a giant essay due, 30 pages, if your to-do list says like write the essay, it's going to be really hard to start that big project, especially starting it early. So defining done as I'm going to do steps 1 and 3 from my breaking it down, that is a way to help with that kind of dread feeling. And allowing time for transitions is important. We've lost a lot of our natural transition time, like walking to class, walking to the library, getting a meal with folks. A lot of the things that we used to rely on to give us transitions are not there anymore. So giving yourself 15 minutes to transition between tasks, like attending a lecture to doing work, can be really important. So as a reminder, procrastination is this alarm, and it shows that there's something wrong in the situation that's stopping us from accomplishing what we want to do. So how can we reverse the procrastination? Here are the steps. Step 1, decide what you need to do. Step 2, break it down into tiny steps. Step 3, take the next step. Step 4, if you're still procrastinating, ask yourself why. That might look like journaling. Correct the issue. We talked about some ways to do that. And then get back to work. So you have some steps now to help reverse your procrastination. They're on the handout that we're going to link you to at the end of this. But there's also an emotional element here that's worth talking more about. So the information I'm going to talk about now comes from a YouTube video from the channel How to ADHD, and they had a guest speaker on from this website called ADHD Rewired. So even if you don't have ADHD, these tips are really helpful, and these are concepts that are really relevant to everyone who struggles with procrastination. So this is the wall of awful. It's the emotional barrier that grows out of repeated failure or perceived failure, and it prevents us from initiating tasks like working on an essay. And this is a language model to help kind of make the abstract concept of negative emotional associations more concrete so that we can name it and work on it. So everyone has walls of awful. Every time we fail at a given task, we get bricks added to our wall. The bricks can be guilt, disappointment, rejection, fear. And as the bricks pile up, they make this wall of awful, which can be a really significant barrier to getting things done. So if you're in college and you're writing an essay, you're not only writing that paper, you're also writing every single essay you've ever struggled with and ever written. And all of those negative feelings and thoughts are coming up from way back in 5th grade, and they're still there. So this wall starts being built when we don't succeed at something, or we feel like we didn't succeed at something. And the negative emotions surrounding that are the start of building the wall. And every time we fail or even think we failed, we add multiple bricks to the wall. So one for failure, one for the disappointment we feel, some for rejection. And then we add more bricks for all the people we feel like we've disappointed with this. So parents, teachers, classmates, partners. And then when the fear of rejection sets in, more of the bricks of each type are added. And then when the guilt sets in, more bricks are added too. So eventually we get this giant wall, and it's really hard to start certain kinds of tasks. And we usually know we have a wall because we're avoiding a task, or we feel a lot of dread toward it, or we're resistant to it. So there are 5 ways that people use to get past their walls of awful. And the first 2 don't work. The third one is bad for you. And the other 2 are good options. So we're going to talk about each of them. The first way that people try to get through their walls of awful are by staring at them. If you were writing a paper that you had a wall of awful around, it might look like opening up a Word document, staring at it, feeling some dread, pulling up Instagram, feeling guilty, closing Instagram, staring at the Word document some more. And that looks like procrastination. So this doesn't engage with the wall and it doesn't work. So method 1 does not work. Method 2 is going around the wall. So this looks like, oh, I'll start with something else and then I'll come back to it. Oh, I'll do something else first. Tomorrow I'll feel better about it. Tonight I'll feel better about it. I work better in the morning, so I'll start it then. And this wall of awful is infinitely wide, so you can't go around it. So method 2 does not work. And this is also what procrastination looks like. That's when we clean our whole apartment instead of making this presentation. That doesn't work. So method 3 is smashing through it. This can look different depending on who's involved in the task and what kind of task it is. So I'll give an outward example first. So if something you're procrastinating on is doing the dishes, and you have someone that you live with and they really want you to do the dishes and they get upset and they're like, do the dishes, they've been here for a week, they smell awful, like please just do them. And then you get really angry and you're like, fine, I'll do the dishes, like just shut up about it, I'll do them. And you take it out on others and you get angry and then you do the dishes. So it worked, but you're also harming your relationships with other people. Like now you've sort of created, like you've hurt that relationship. And then the other way we smash, which I think might relate more towards doing work, is that smashing inwardly. So telling ourselves things like, I suck, why can't I do this? What's wrong with me? I'm lazy. And we keep kind of getting angry and saying these mean things to ourselves. And eventually that can give us the motivation to smash through the wall. But it really hurts our self-esteem and it really hurts our relationship with ourselves. So although this method works, it's not a healthy long-term solution. And if you remember at the beginning when I said that saying we're lazy and telling ourselves that can be a way to help increase our motivation, this is how we can make ourselves really angry at ourselves and get ourselves to do the task. So now that we've talked about the 2 ways that don't work and the 1 way that's not healthy, it will give you the good solutions. So the 4th method is climbing the wall. And what this is doing emotional work inside of ourselves. That can be like talking to ourselves, like, I can do this, I just need to start this. It's gearing up to do the task. This can look a little bit different for different people, but you probably need to talk to yourself a bit. And I can't tell you what to say because it needs to be something that connects for you and feels authentic. But some kind of affirmation is good. So for me, I might say something like, okay, you finished this kind of thing before many times and you can do it this one. Or, you know, you always get your work done eventually and you're going to do it right now. And if you have a mental health provider, this can be something you can talk about with them, about the kind of feelings that come up for you and the kind of gearing up that might work. So the first part of climbing the wall of awful is knowing that you have a wall of awful for the task. And as soon as you realize have this wall, you can say to yourself, okay, I'm climbing a wall of awful. That's the language you want to use. You could say more psychology things like, oh, I'm sitting in my distress. But we like this because climbing's an active verb and it feels like you're doing something. Like my first step is climbing this wall of awful. So it's a good reframe. So gearing up emotionally, like I was saying things to yourself, kind of giving yourself some time to pull it together. Giving yourself time to transition can be important for climbing the wall. Not giving yourself the expectation that you finish one thing and then move right into the next one. Defining done can be important for climbing the wall. Again, making it seem like doable. Like, okay, I'm gonna outline it and write the first paragraph. Again, journaling about what's coming up for you is a great way to climb the wall of awful because you really need to tackle all of these bricks in this big wall that you've built over many years about this kind of task. And doing some grounding and mindfulness exercises is also a great way to climb the wall. So that might look like doing some breathing exercises like square breathing, where you'll take 4 or 5 second inhale, hold it for 4 or 5 seconds, release it for 4 or 5 seconds, and then hold for 4 or 5 seconds, and do that a few times. Grounding, like cueing into your environment. What do you see around you? How does the chair feel? How does the floor feel under your feet? Giving yourself a second to like gear up emotionally again. And then finally, one other tool for climbing the wall would be writing down your accomplishments. So this is giving yourself a chance to recognize when you've climbed this wall before and how it went okay, and giving yourself a little bit more confidence in your ability to do so. So the fifth way of dealing with the wall of awful is called putting a door in it. This is basically increasing your dopamine, so that reward system in your brain, and then riding the wave of dopamine into completing the task. This can look different for different people, but I'll give some examples. So this might be playing some pump up music to get yourself going and then sitting down to start. Again, creating a time limit is actually a way to put a door in it as well, because you're giving yourself that deadline, that sort of norepinephrine, like, okay, like this is due, like I need to work on it. Working in a new place. This is a little bit challenging now, but I've been experimenting with this in my own apartment. This might be working in a new room. This might be working on the floor. This might be standing at your dresser as a standing desk. I worked on this in the kitchen. So trying to find ways to increase dopamine, because we get dopamine out of like novel situations and things like that. Exercise is an awesome way to put a door in it. So like doing a quick YouTube workout and then sitting down to work and riding that dopamine wave. That's actually one of the best ways. So again, putting a door in it makes it easier to do the task right now, because you're kind of riding that dopamine wave into completing the task. But putting a door in it doesn't make it easier for next time, but it does help us do it now. So putting handholds in the wall of awful is this idea that we can do some reflection and it can make the wall a little less big next time. And it doesn't really make it less big, but it makes it a little easier for us to scale the wall next time. So the first way of putting handholds in the wall is to understand how long tasks really take by timing them. So I'll give a personal example. I hate doing my taxes, And every year I put off doing my taxes until the very last minute. And in my head, doing taxes is something that takes like 14 hours. Like you have to spend the whole day without stopping working on your taxes, and it takes forever. By the time you find all your documents and you figure out what software you're supposed to use and what 27.A1B form is, by the time you do all of that, it takes 14 hours. So one way to put handholds in the wall is to understand how long tasks really take by timing them. So the last time I did taxes, I timed it and it took 3 hours. It didn't take 14 hours. And knowing that and having that information, that that's how long it takes, is really helpful for me to have my handholds in the wall. Another way to put handholds in the wall is to outline what you did retrospectively. So we talked about breaking down what you're doing into tiny steps, but maybe you didn't actually end up following those steps, or maybe one step came in a different order. So writing down what you did retrospectively is going to help you next time, because you'll have a better kind of internal schema of what doing this task takes. Another really important way to put handholds in the wall is to reflect on how things have gone and why. This might also look like journaling. So thinking about what you were doing beforehand. Did you ride a wave of dopamine to get into it? Where did you do it? What were you feeling about it? How do you feel now? And that kind of reflection is really important, because it helps us internalize that we can do these tasks and that we can be successful at that. I had to reflect a lot on that I was actually able to do my taxes. I hope this helps next year. So compassion and forgiveness and empathy are really important here, because we have these walls of awful that we build over time, and it makes it really hard for us to get things done, and we don't want to make those walls bigger. So this involves being kinder to ourselves while we're working on things or when we perceive failure. So let's say I wanted to work on this presentation and I didn't get together in a day. So I might say things like, I'm so dumb, I didn't understand this, or this is really like saying bad things, I'm lazy. And an important way to be empathetic, and the way you might do that, is to reframe. So to say like, wow, this is really hard for me. Or like, I tried pretty hard on this, and tomorrow I'm gonna break it down into even smaller steps. I could give you a million things to say about yourself right now and examples, but it really has to come from you. So something that's been really important for me to learn personally is that I'm a student, and when I was a student, and because I'm a student, I'm still learning. And I might not be able to do what I've been assigned perfectly, but I'm learning and I'm here to learn, and that's okay. I just need to try. So finding things to say to yourself that you're going to find that you're going to connect with and aren't just sort of artificial mantras that you don't connect with is a great way to be more empathetic. But trying to be nice to yourself when you aren't able to complete something with the quality that you want to, or on the day that you meant to do it. So I'm going to share a lot of resources now that I've found helpful. I'm linking the tomato timer. This timer is useful for utilizing that Pomodoro method that I talked about. So the period of work, short break, period of work, short break, period of work, long break. And this website allows you to adjust the length of the work and the breaks to find something that works for you. There's this YouTube channel that I love. Some of the content from today is the sort of thing that the person who owns the channel talks about. And even if you don't have ADHD, it's a really great way to get strategies to help get tasks done and organize and not procrastinate. So I highly recommend that channel. There is a website called Wait But Why, and the gentleman who runs the website has explanations on many, many different kinds of things, but his procrastination series is incredible. It talks about he has like a monkey and a playground, and there's like a great metaphor for all the kind of things that procrastinators struggle with. So there's a series. The first one's why procrastinators procrastinate. The second one is how to beat procrastination. And the third is the procrastination matrix. So if you're looking to read more about procrastination, it's really some fun and engaging content. I'm also going to share 2 books that I found really helpful. I found them that they've helped me with my own workflow, with my study techniques, and learning a lot more about how to foster concentration and what concentration really is and what it requires and how to build that muscle. So the first one is How to Become a Straight A Student. I feel that the title is not quite as indicative of the contents, but it really talks about different ways to study, different ways to write essays, and ways to minimize the amount of time that you need to take to do these kinds of tasks. That way, when I outlined how I study for a biology final, that is from this book. The second book, and it's the same author, Cal Newport, is called Deep Work: Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. This book is all about how the way that our world is kind of structured right now with our phones and social media and all of the things we have access to at any time are really antithetical to trying to get things done, and how we can best kind of structure our worlds and our environments to help us focus, and how we can practice focusing. So I found both these books to be really helpful, and I really recommend this author. So thank you for being here. That's the information that I have to present, and I'm ready to take questions if you have any.